So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and J-Monster was kind enough to provide me with a battle which can act as a sort of prelude to the Imladris faction showcase, which I will be doing a couple of days hence. And yeah, this one they're going to be going up against the Misty Mountains. Obviously J-Monster himself is going to be playing as Imladris, and I think it's a lucky Hussar, indeed it is, playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Don't worry about the two stars over in the distance. I think Enxfitz and Starkiller X are just spectating the battle. This is a 1v1 essentially, although there is a little bit less room to work with considering the fact that they've deployed in the corner over here, but it shouldn't affect things too much. I mean, the grassy plain is not exactly a map where too much trickery is going to be involved. But let's go through Imladris first of all, since they're going to be the focus as we move forward. And we'll start off with his two cavalry wings, because he's got quite a lot of cavalry on either flank, which of course means he's going to have spent considerably less on his infantry corps, because Imladris' cavalry, when you field them in numbers such as this, they do get very expensive. Starting off with some of these Imladris riders, so he's got some horse archers, which maybe the high elves of Imladris, as they're now known, are a little bit less known for than the likes of Lothlorien with their Galatran riders, but the Imladris riders, while they aren't multiple HP, they are still fairly numerous, and of course Imladris, as a general rule, have got the highest of the elven armour value, so they will at least be able to stand up to counterfire from the opposing skirmish lines pretty well. I'm not sure. Their armour looks slightly rusted and battered based on their look, but even so they're going to be sort of leading the line, doing a bit of harassment. Just in behind them we can see some Imladris sentinels who also look like they've been rolling in the mud a little bit, and they are going to be backed up by some Norröno cavalry. Now the Imladris sentinels, it's worth mentioning, of course, are spear cavalry, so they do have that bonus versus cavalry in melee, and they can also act as sort of rudimentary lancers. They aren't quite as good as dedicated lancers at this job, but they will still do it, so they do still have a good charge bonus. Now this is going to be a very important part of your cavalry line, because of course it does give you that anti-cavalry, gives you the ability to contest a cavalry versus cavalry fight, which is going to be very important for a faction like this, especially when they sort of go a little bit more cavalry heavy, which Imladris can do. And if you go cavalry heavy like J-Monster has here, the necessity is that you can sort of hold your own in a cavalry fight, which the Imladris sentinels allow you to do. He's also got Norröno cavalry down here, who they too have got an armour upgrade, so a lot of Imladris' units have been given an armour upgrade again. Looks a little bit sort of dented and rusted, their armour, but having said that, the Norröno cavalry are just dedicated lancers, so they won't do quite as well in a melee, but they do obviously have that armour-piercing charge, and they aren't quite as expensive as the other options that the High Elves have in terms of cavalry. Moving over to his other wing, however, and we will start off with the Gwaith-i-Rhokdor, which, again, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with these armour models. A lot of them look kind of grubby, to be honest with you. But the Gwaith-i-Rhokdor, of course, I think, and this is unconfirmed, but I've been told that they have been changed to knights, which would make a great deal of sense, because to be honest with you, as multiple HP lancers, they were never really worth it. They would always be a little bit too expensive for what they offered, but making them knights would also tie together Imladris' cavalry line very well and make them a more genuine threat on horseback. So I would hope that they're knights. I mean, we'll probably find out in this battle whether or not they are or not, because if they come into contact with wargs as basic lancers, then chances are they will very quickly find themselves outmatched. We've got another unit of Imladris riders out here and another unit of Norröno cavalry, so he's got some anti-cav with his Imladris sentinels, I think they were called, and yeah, and the Gwaith-i-Rhokdor. He's also got some lancers and some horse archers, so he's invested very heavy in his cavalry wing, which against the orcs can be risky considering their wargs and considering especially the Misty Mountains with how much anti-cavalry they can bring. But hopefully the skill of these elven units will stand in pretty good stead. And then back here we've got some tactical geometry going on with his infantry line, so he's primarily got pole arms, it must be said. Out here on the side we've got a couple of units, I think, of the Elder Quinga, which are the lowest tier of Imladris archers, and they actually run contrary to the armour sort of that Imladris generally have in their favour, but even so, having a low armour value doesn't really hurt them too much, because they are the cheapest of the High Elven archers, and they still do better damage than most other basic entry archers from other factions. Having a look at the front here, we've also got several units of the Eldar Makar, which are of course the basic elven infantry that you can field, very similar to the Megil-i-Erin from Mirkwood that we've already had a look at, or something like the Harlanded infantry. That is Imladris' equivalent essentially. They've got their armour upgrade as well, which make them look very cool indeed. Again, they don't really have the highest armor values, which is again something which doesn't really take advantage of Imladris's sort of benefits next to the other elves, but against the Misty Mountains they don't really need to, because this is a unit which is going to be more than sufficient to deal with basic goblins. It's really going to take one of Misty Mountain's better units to even cut through the most basic of Imladris's units. And he's also got some Eldar Atar, which are just in behind them, which are two-handed spear units, I believe, and apparently Kuro has told me that they are actually worth something now. They have, for as long as Third Age has been a thing, ever since vanilla, I've always found these guys to be utterly useless, but we'll see if they are now finally worth their weight in the army, because they are going to be helping the Eldar Makar hold down the front, and if they aren't enough, then surely the Imladris sentries will be a couple of units of these Imladris pikes, which again, one of the better pike units in the game. They're pretty comparable to the First Legion from Khazad-dûm, only they don't have a shield, but they do have slightly higher melee skill. So yeah, that is the High Elven army. Now we will move over to the Misty Mountains to see what they've got going on. And of course they've got a heavy Warg presence, because they can potentially be very cost effective against expensive Elven cavalry. The Warg skirmishers of course getting a few volleys off before the elves contact with them, and then backed up by the dedicated melee Wargs, very potent combination with the AP missiles and the heavy anti-cavalry bonus in melee. And then at the front we've also got several units of lower tier goblin archers, which again can be very difficult for the elves to skirmish with, because there's simply so many of them, and they will just be poking away at you with their low quality arrows. But Imladris for the most part will be able to stand up to a lot of this low tier fire, but they have opted to bring their lightly armoured lower tier elven archers, so we'll see how well they can do there, and obviously some heavy goblin archers as well, so slightly heavier armour but slightly less of them in the unit. Moving out here we have yet more Wargs, including another unit of standard Warg Riders, and of course I'm not really too surprised to see these guys either. We have the Bolg Champions with their new unit model as well, so they've been given the same unit model that I think the Black Uruks of the Mountains and the Gundabad Guard have been given. I think that's actually the Gundabad Guard, but yes, obviously they still share a unit model technically. So yes, we've got the Bolg Champions, obviously not quite as strong as the Champions of the White Hand or the Melkor's Chosen, but they are slightly cheaper, and they will still be very effective against cavalry and melee. So the High Elven Cavalry doesn't really want to stick around with these guys for too long in melee if they can help it. Skirmishing them from a distance with the Horse Archers will probably be what is called for here. And obviously we do also have some Troll Drummers, who have been given slightly new textures, I think. What's going on here? Something's not quite right here, I don't think, but look at this. He's got a tree. So this guy's, I think this is actually one of the new cave troll models, which I think might have been added. Oh, that's why, they're cave troll drummers, so they've been differentiated a bit from the Mordor lines. So obviously they've been given that derpy expression from the movies. And then back into the Misty Mountains infantry line, and of course, once again, we can see the heavy goblin spears. They have been toned down in the amount that they can bring over the last hotfix, but they are still very much the core of the Misty Mountains army, and they will be pretty good here because obviously of Imladris's generally higher armour values, but then Imladris have opted to bring their more lightly armoured troops, so maybe this is a good counterplay here from J-Monster to try and counteract the obvious appearance of the heavy goblin spears. And they're going to need to be backed up by some pretty heavy numbers, these spearmen. Fortunately, he does have some units which are a little bit more capable in melee, including the Black Uruks. They will be able to hold their own, particularly against the troops that Imladris have bought in general. Only really the pikes are going to be able to keep them at range, whereas the Eldar Makar will take casualties to the likes of the Black Uruks, because there are quite a few of them and they are pretty decent. And then also Lucky Hussar has invested heavily into a couple of units of Goblin infantry as well, heavy Goblin infantry for numbers, and they will be pretty good for backing up the heavy Goblin spears, but individually they will get massacred by the Imladris troops. Some Black Uruks over on this flank as well, and then at the back, of course, we have the cave trolls with a mix of these giant hammers and now the tree. So Crimson Badley, I think, is responsible for these trolls as well. So they've been given a unique model, and they now look scary, which fits the fact that they are a very effective unit at breaking blinds, although J-Monster hasn't gone for too many foot archers, so it remains to be seen whether that's actually going to be a good move from the Misty Mountains, and we shall begin. So, okay. Well, those guys are just going to be spectating, I suppose. But first of all, we can sort of surmise that J-Monster is going to try and harass the Goblin lines with his Horse Archers. Now, they are going to be pretty resilient with that armour upgrade of theirs, but even so, with the amount of Goblin Archers they've got on station here, really the important thing is just going to be keeping those Wargs safe from being skirmished down. And if they can do that, if they can keep their Wargs hidden behind their low-tier fodder archers for a decent amount of time, then J-Monster is going to have to hold his Horse Archers back in reserve, because Those Imladris riders are going to be very important for peppering down all these wargs. Because even with Imladris' cavalry expertise, I think they would still find themselves overpowered in a pure melee fight with these wargs. But as soon as archers are added into the equation, the wargs will melt pretty quickly. J-Monster's infantry corps is unmoving, which is unsurprising considering the tactical geometry he has adopted. But it is going to be a case of him trying to sort of probe away at the Misty Mountains lines with the cavalry, which is not really the most attractive proposition. The Misty Mountains can probably weather that storm with all of their numbers in terms of their archers. And even if they do lose a few wargs, it won't be the end of the world, because they do have a decent amount of trolls that they can also use as a rudimentary anti-cavalry tool, particularly seeing as they won't really be needed to break any high elven lines to get at skirmishers. But I think we can pretty safely assume it's going to be a fairly slow start to this encounter. I mean, if I were the Misty Mountains player, I would probably be a little bit wary of the cavalry, but also the onus is kind of on them to move forward and be the aggressor here.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
Excuse me? I guess that's one of the spectators. Yeah, you can see here that the Misty Mountains is not eager to sort of come out with their defensive posture. They've got their wargs hidden amongst their infantry and archers. And that is understandable. I mean, the high elven horse archers can be very, very effective, but I'd be pretty frustrated with this stance if I were J-Monster, because there isn't really an easy way in or out. This might be the sort of time where you want to move forward your infantry, honestly, because they are leaving their front lines a little bit isolated. And honestly, a lot of the Misty Mountains infantry is going to be no match at all for the high elven infantry here. Really, only the Black Uruks and the Cave Trolls would be enough to give you pause in a sustained fight. And that might be the sort of thing which convinces the Misty Mountains player to come out of his shell a bit here and then allow the cavalry to start getting some hits. See here the Goblin Archers moving out to sort of go for the Imladris Riders, but that would leave a little bit of a gap here. Goblin Infantry revealing itself. 2 units of Goblin Infantry, obviously complete trash in melee, but yet more numbers that can be used to sort of clog the front lines. There's a lot of loose formation going on here. The Goblin Archers are reloading, so they are going to be in range of the Imladris Riders. So there's 52 of them. Will any of them fall after just one volley? The Goblins are pretty inaccurate, so against a moving target, probably not, and indeed the Imladris Riders are fine. Any arrows that did hit the armour would be sufficient to stop any casualties for the time being. The Imladris Riders coming in from the rear now. What are they actually going to be targeting? The Black Uruks, perhaps? Or are they in range of the Bolg's champions? Or the Warg Riders, I should say. They are in range of the Warg Riders. None of them falling just yet, but that won't last too long, I would imagine. As soon as their defences are bypassed, they will fall away pretty quickly. The Wargs, of course, have got absolutely dreadful armour values, and now some of them are starting to fall away. The High Elven Lancer, Cavalry and Knights just sort of waiting on the periphery. Misty Mountains very eager to sort of try and weather this Imladris cavalry storm before moving forward, which is understandable, because if they advance forward prematurely, then the High Elven Lancers are surely going to find gaps in the Misty Mountains lines as they advance. Those Warg Riders have taken a few casualties, however, so it is sort of slow and steady wins the race here, which, based on the stance that the Misty Mountains have taken and the army that J-Monster has picked, that's kind of unsurprising. Having said that, getting some decent skirmish here into the back of these Black Uruks, which are really one of the only genuine threats that they're going to face in melee. Other than them and the Cave Trolls, as I've said, none of these goblins are really going to pose too much of a threat to the highly skillful Imladris infantry. Which is still content to hold its position. Again, the Imladris Riders, one of them has fallen in that unit, and in that unit. One each. Still a very tentative skirmish here. Let's head out to these Imladris Riders and sort of hang around with them. You can see that the Heavy Goblin Archers are now in range, trying to sort of skirmish with them. Another unit falls. Not sure how this is going to work out. I mean, if I were Imladris, I would probably, I mean, you're kind of forced with the army that you have to just sort of keep at this tactic, and eventually some of the damage on the Wargs will probably tell, but you can see that the Wargs sort of standing here. I mean, shame on a lucky Hussar's house for trying to sort of box up as the Misty Mountains of all factions. You can't deny it's effective, but you're not going to win yourself many friends by employing tactics such as this. The Imladris Riders taking a few more casualties. Goblin infantry revealing itself, acting as a sort of effective shield, allowing them a little bit more space, the Misty Mountains, allowing them a little bit more time to skirmish with the Imladris Riders, who are taking, slowly but surely taking some casualties. This is a fairly long fight for a 1v1, 17,000 frames. But I get the feeling that a lot of this is going to happen at once, because I can't see this the stance of either player really changing anytime soon. The Misty Mountains has definitely sort of laid out his plans for the fight. But Imladris, we shall see if Imladris' strength can hold firm, because the Misty Mountains really do want to bleed out some of these units from Imladris and allow them no cost effectiveness at all. And if they can isolate the infantry, then maybe the Goblins' numbers will simply shine true in the end. The Misty Mountains are starting to move forward tentatively. If they move too close to the Imladris lines, however, that will allow the Eldar Quinga to help their horse archers in the skirmish a little bit. Slow and steady wins the race, I suppose. And the heavy Goblin spears under normal circumstances are pretty good against most factions, and even against Imladris, if Imladris have invested into their more expensive infantry. But here, with the more lightly armoured Eldar Etar and Eldar Makar, that's not really going to be the case. Those Imladris riders getting into position, getting ready to skirmish in and getting some nice volleys off into these wargs. This is the more lightly damaged version, however. I think they're going for the warg skirmishers, although they're going to once again need to get out of there, so that's some good horse archer micro. Again, if you bring horse archers in lower quantities like the elves that can bring horse archers tend to, they're forced to in many ways. They are very micro intensive when you can't just plaster the field with them like Rohan and Khan can. And again, these warg riders are not going to be able to catch up to the very swift elven steeds, but they are going to be quite content to just chase them into the ether, I think, which is quite an interesting life choice, because slowly but surely they're going to be bled. Well, what's going on the other side? As that continues, we can also see that the Imladris riders over on this side are targeting. Again, they're going for the wargs. Again, that is the best target. Getting simultaneous hits on a unit of Bolg's champions and regular warg riders. I think they're just going for the warg riders though, because they've already been damaged. I mean, they can scarcely miss here. Some of the elves are actually missing, which is madness. Meanwhile, again, it's a very tentative fight. These wargs still chasing the Imladris riders. But these wargs are not going to do too well if they take a charge from the Gwathi Rokdor and the Noraturno cavalry. That's going to kill an awful lot of them in one go. And then their anti-cavalry bonus will not be enough to save them. Don't know if those Imladris riders are already out of ammunition. They are not. They are still firing. Need to be careful though. These wargs are not stopping anytime soon. That unit of wargs is going to find itself very, very isolated, especially when the Eldar Quinga are also in range of them, but I think the wargs kind of get the memo that they're being baited, so they are now retreating. Meanwhile, let's have a look at what the Imladris cavalry is doing over here. The Imladris riders taking some pretty substantial volleys from the Goblin archers, and they are now retreating, but there are several dead wargs over here, and honestly I think the Misty Mountains here, who are trying to box up, gaps have been found in their line as they have moved forward, and this might come back to haunt them in the late game as the warg riders try and run away. They're being shot in the back every step of the way by the Imladris riders. These wargs are going to be very necessary to stop the High Elven cavalry as well. The cave trolls could do that job, but the trolls are also likely to take some pretty heavy casualties from a charge. There's several of those wargs. I mean, look at them as they get shot in the back, littering the field with their corpses. There's a trail of them that lead back to the Goblin lines, but now they're sort of back behind the safety of the Goblin archers, who are now going to be able to skirmish with the Imladris riders. It's been very good horse archer micro so far. And the High Elven cavalry shooting some arrows into the Goblin archers, but I mean at this point the Horse archers have largely done their job. What's going on here? The Imladris Riders getting a little bit too close to comfort. Have they run out of ammunition? I mean, they have their swords out, so it's possible. This unit over here looking considerably more battered, but then they've been skirmished down by both varieties of Goblin archers. We'll see how well each unit did as we go forward, but again the Misty Mountains have sort of moved forward, but they've kind of stopped. And the Imladris Riders are once again going to be able to sort of find the soft underbelly of these wargs and again fire a few more volleys into them. Not sure what the Misty Mountains is going to do here. I imagine they're just going to try and move forward. Again, going to try and shoot the warg skirmishers. A unit whose javelins could be used on the High Elven pikes as well. Several of them falling by the wayside. Again, this has been very good work with the Horse Archers thus far, but I think the Misty Mountains slowly but surely are coming to realise they need to do something here. If they simply stay as they are, then it's going to be very bad for them. Speaking of very bad for individual units, this Noratuno Cavalry is going to catch the back corner of this Goblin Infantry, and needless to say the Goblin Infantry is going to stand no chance at all. Defeat seems certain. A cheeky charge there into the back corner of the unit, not the finest connection, but still wiping out even more Goblins, which again, numbers is something that the Misty Mountains are obviously going to have to use against Imladris. Without numbers, they are sunk. Noratuno Cavalry getting a nice charge into the front of this Goblin Infantry, a much better connection there. Massive casualties there. And again, this is only Goblin Infantry, but again, just thinning out the herd here is going to be very significant. The Eldar Quinga are out front, ready to try and skirmish. This is also going to act as a pretty good screening tool against the wargs, because if they get too close and engage the High Elven Cavalry near the Elven Archers, then Imladris are going to have the best of times, even on horseback. Do these boys still have their bows out? They do. But the back lines are being defended by Goblin Archers, but again coming in for another charge, the Noratuno Cavalry. Not only the Goblin Infantry, but the Heavy Goblin Spears are here. Now the Noratuno Cavalry are going to want to get out of there in quick order, which they do. And again, if you can cycle out Shock Cavalry very quickly against low tier spears, you're still going to have some measure of success. Several of those horses did die, but even so, that's more Goblins that aren't going to be able to engage in an infantry fight. And those Imladris Riders over there do still have some ammunition, but they are a shadow of their former selves. Trying to get some pot shots up onto these warg skirmishers. Imladris Riders still harassing the back lines mercilessly. The Eldar Quinga are all over the place. The Goblins, I think, would try and skirmish with the Elves under this situation normally, but they've probably already used up a lot of their ammunition trying to ward off and zone out the Imladris Riders. So the Horse Archers so far have definitely proven their worth. Noratuno Cavalry swinging out wide. Going for those Goblin Archers might not be the worst idea, but the Eldar Quinga have already picked out their target, and it is the Black Uruks. Again, the Misty Mountains can't really afford to lose the Black Uruks, because they're going to be relying on them to really keep their infantry line together. And even if the wargs manage to beat the High Elven Cavalry at this point, they would not be sufficient to deal with the High Elven Infantry, particularly with those pikes. And honestly, I'm struggling to see what, the Cave Trolls would be able to do the job of bringing down the Imladris pikes, but other than that, there isn't really a great deal else that would be able to deal with them. And increasingly the Misty Mountains army is looking less and less intimidating as time goes on. And this is the danger of waiting around with the Orcs. The Goblin Infantry is moving forward now, which will force the Imladris Archers back behind their infantry, but I'm not sure if the Goblins are going to have any sort of success against the Imladris Infantry here. Again, it looks like the Noratuno Cavalry are going to go in for a charge. Though the wargs are just there. Maybe they fancy their chances. I mean, it is a charge. Let's see. Warg Riders didn't really take any losses to speak of, and they inflicted some pretty hefty casualties on the Noriterno cavalry in return. The Imladris riders also charging in, but with their charge bonus of 1, they are not likely to get much work done at all. So being thrown under the bus, most likely to allow the Noriterno cavalry to escape. And now, switching their target to the Black Uruks, the mountains. Several of them getting skewered, many more of them getting shot. The Gwaith stood off. The cave trolls are moving in, trying to save the Black Uruks, and they will. What's going on the other side? Cavalry engagements continue. Imladris Sentinels are actually going to defeat the Warg Skirmishers and the Noriterno cavalry, so let's actually turn the speed down a little bit here while everything's going on. Noriterno cavalry charging into the back of the Black Uruks, and this is where the gaps in the Misty Mountains line are going to be found out, I think. And worse than that, I don't think they're going to be able to overwhelm the High Elven front line. There simply aren't enough. There are a lot of heavy Goblin spears and infantry, but ultimately I think the quality of the Eldar Makar, particularly when they're backed up by polearms, the Eldar Etar and the Imladris Sentinels, who are actually moving out to the flanks to defend against the Wargs. This is a lot of goblins, but I still think overall the quality of these High Elven troops is eventually going to show. They're shaken for some reason. I think that might be the presence of the cave troll drummers. But the back lines at this point are looking increasingly more ropey for the Misty Mountains. The Bolg Champion's going to be a tough nut to crack, but I mean, there are spear cavalry back here. The Warg Skirmishers are still being skirmished with. And then over here we also have the Gwaith Irokdor, who have taken 1 loss. The Warg Riders are trying to zone them out, I think. You can see here the cave trolls are still moving in, so we can move back up to 1 speed as it's pretty clear what's going on by now. The Black Uruks are going to be able to get into melee. They are a little bit damaged. You can actually see that the overlapping is happening. And these pikes need to form up and sort of get into these heavy goblin infantry pretty fast. The Warg Riders are actually sort of chasing the Gwaith Irokdor and are going to catch them. It's very unfortunate for J-Monster. These pikes need to form up in a much more cohesive line than they are right now. Now the cave trolls are coming into the front line, which will be more than enough to swing this fight into the Misty Mountains' favour. They'll be able to do a lot of damage to those Eldar Etar, which for the time being are actually holding off the heavy goblins reasonably well. Maybe the impossible has been achieved, and they are now at a unit which is actually pretty decent. Noriterno cavalry getting some rear charges. They need to steer well clear of the Bolg Champions, though. All of the High Elven cavalry needs to steer well clear of them. A nice rear charge coming in there from the Imladris Sentinels, killing off several heavy Goblin spears, being chased by the Warg Riders. What's happening with the Gwaith Irokdor? The Eldar Queen are getting several point-blank shots with the Warg Riders, and well, there are the Gwaith Irokdor. They haven't taken too many losses either. Now, I would question the merits of sending the Black Uruks in against the Imladris Sentries. Really, the Imladris Sentries are just something you want to distract and save for the late game so you can overwhelm them. Sending in your best melee infantry unit to essentially die against them is not the best idea. I can't actually see the percentages because, of course, it's technically a free-for-all. The Gwaith Irokdor are going to get a nice charge, however, into the Bolg Champions at that. Taking several losses there. And if they are knights now, this might be just the sort of thing. I mean, losing the Bolg Champions might be the thing which sort of determines this fight as a whole. I mean, having a look, we can see that there are sections of the High Elven line which are struggling, where the cave trolls are. And over here, these Imladris sentries are being overwhelmed by the infantry and the cave trolls. The Eldar Quinga are being distracted. Without this cavalry, the Misty Mountains, with the help of those trolls, would probably be sufficient to win the infantry engagement, especially when the Eldar Etar, even if they've been made better, they still aren't the cleverest unit in the world because they're pointing the wrong way. But I don't think the Misty Mountains will have anything to stop a unit of marauding knights at this point. The Warg Skirmishers will try, but I don't think they'll have too much in the way of success. The Cave Troll Drummers will allow the Misty Mountains to fight for a lot longer than they otherwise would. Here, the Eldar Makar, there's only a thin line of them, but where the Misty Mountains aren't receiving the backup of the trolls, they're really struggling against this Imladris infantry line. Heavy Goblin archers being sent into melee to try and trap this Noriterno cavalry, which they will manage, but again, this is going really badly for the Black Uruks. The Imladris sentries easily holding them at bay. Noratino Cavalry actually managed to get out of there, but many of them died in the attempt. Eldar Etar trying to sort of shift their lines. The Cave Trolls now charging into the back of the Imladris line. I mean, the Goblins still have a lot of infantry left. These Warg Skirmishers, defeat is now a distinct possibility. The Gwathi Rockdor will be able to finish them off fairly easily, and as soon as they get free, the rear charging can begin, but the High Elven line isn't going to last too much longer, I don't think. I mean, this section of the line here has gone firmly in favour of the Misty Mountains, and they're going to start to wrap up the High Elven infantry line, and if the Heavy Goblin Spears are not distracted and they can't get rear charges on them, that will be enough to give victory to the Misty Mountains, I think. If they can form up a decent front against the Imladris Cavalry, although this over here is not good for the Misty Mountains. There's still a whole unit of Imladris sentries that they need to deal with, really. And there comes a nice rear charge from the Gwathi Rockdor right into the thickest section of the Goblin lines. And the Misty Mountains won't be able to take too much more of that, I don't think. They will start to break off. The Cave Troll Drummers are sort of being sent forward now in melee. They are not great in melee. But the Misty Mountains are running out of options here, I think. When your backlines are this compromised, especially from a unit as strong as the Gwathi Rockdor, you're going to have a bad time. These Goblin Archers are almost certainly going to break under a charge like that. Amazingly, no. Only wavering. So those Cave Troll Drummers sufficient to keep those Goblins in the fight for a little bit longer. There are still some Bolgs champions, including Azog, but they won't last too much longer. There simply isn't enough of them anymore to really be effective, and the Gwathi Rockdor really proving their worth in melee. So too are the Cave Trolls, however, and now the Imladris infantry line finds itself completely surrounded with these heavy Goblin spears charging into the rear of that High Elven front line. So yeah, the Imladris cavalry is going to need to do some fairly heavy lifting to secure victory here. So that Gwathi Rockdor is going to need to do some heavy damage because the Misty Mountains infantry line has proven simply too numerous, and it was the Cave Trolls that did a lot of the damage here. They caused the holes in the line because alone the heavy Goblin infantry and spears would not have been sufficient to beat that High Elven front line. Another nice rear charge coming in there. That will almost certainly be enough to break them this time. Simply aren't enough of them. Trying to go for those drummers, I think, to sort of break the soul of the Misty Mountains army at this point. I mean, they did break, but they're fighting to the death still. This is going to be pretty significant as well. The Imladris sentry is going to be victorious over on this flank, and that is going to be something else which can reinforce this centre here, which is kind of what the Misty Mountains are pinning their hopes on at this point, because the Cave Trolls are all dead now, which means the Eldar Etar and the Eldar Makar have actually turned this fight around over here. The Gwathi Rockdor is still rear charging. Yeah, I think that the Misty Mountains are finished, actually. Getting a nice charge there. One of the trolls going flying. That's pretty amusing. What's going on over here? Because there were a unit of Imladris sentries over here as well, and they're actually being hacked down. The support of the Black Uruks over here with these heavy Goblin infantrymen, they are surrounded, so Misty Mountains will win that flank, but they simply don't have enough left in terms of quality, I think, to genuinely go toe-to-toe with the Gwaith and with the Imladris Pikes, who are now sort of heading towards the centre. The Misty Mountains trying to break this pocket of High Elven infantry here in the middle. But the Gwaith still rear charging, still getting tons of kills.
The battle seems to be swinging in our favour. From such tidings does victory.
Yeah, I mean, the Imladris Pikes over here defeated, but that just makes them an open target for the Gwaith as they try and sort of consolidate their forces to Misty Mountains. I mean, they need to try and surround the Imladris sentries because from the front, they would be sufficient to deal with everything left.
The enemy general lies dead.
Well, there goes Azog. At the hands of the Knights. I've been calling them Knights, and based on their performance against the Wargs, I would assume that this is true. The Eldar Etar are surrounded, but not by units of real quality. And now the Gwathi Rockdor, they have a nice charge onto the Black Uruks of the mountains, really the only unit that Misty Mountains have left, which stands a hope against any of these High Elven units. There's still one Bolgs champion, which they promptly slaughtered. And now the goblins are starting to break off. Even though there is still a drummer alive, the goblins simply don't have enough, so the quality has shone through in the end. I would not like to be these heavy goblins, completely surrounded and encircled by pikes. And on the one side they aren't receiving a charge, and that's going to be enough to defeat the Misty Mountains army completely. He admits defeat, and that is a victory for Imladris, which is good, because obviously as a sort of lead into their showcase, it does help if you show some of their strengths. Obviously getting 3,000 kills, but it is elves against goblins, so the kills discrepancy, even if the Misty Mountains were to win, they probably would have killed less. So having a look at some of the stats, 416 kills from the Gwaith, I think that kind of confirms that they're knights in many ways. Obviously knights are very capable at getting that amount of kills if the back lines are completely uncontested, which in this case, as soon as those wargs started to fall away, I think that the loss of the Bolgs champions to the Gwaithi Rockdoor was kind of the final nail in the Misty Mountains coffin, because then they really had nothing that could stop the Gwaithi Rockdoor from simply ravaging their back lines, which is a bit of a shame for the Misty Mountains, because as time went on, I think they probably would have won the front line. The damage the cave trolls did was significant, and they were starting to encircle a lot of the Imladris lines. The pikes still would have been a bit of a wild card there, but with good manoeuvring, the Misty Mountains could have sort of surrounded them. Having a look at all of these kills throughout the Imladris line, we have, obviously 300, nearly breaking 300 on a couple of units of Eldar Makar, 150 on the one that was less effective throughout the battle, but there's still a lot of goblins that he killed. Obviously the Imladris Riders doing decently with their ammunition, considering that quite a fair amount of those kills would have been wargs, which were really the genuine threat to the army that Imladris had brought, which was cavalry heavy. And having a look down here, I mean, the Eldar Attar did fairly well. I mean, they're not really a killing machine, they're more of a line holding unit, but they weren't worthless in this situation. They didn't crumble in the face of the goblin hordes. And the Imladris sentries as well, the pikes doing decently. One unit had to deal with cave trolls, and that was the unit which I think got defeated. The sentinels also doing decently well, so a lot of kills across the board. Of course you expect that against the goblins. But yeah, this leads in quite well to the Imladris showcase, because their quality really did shine through here against the Misty Mountains. Good use of the horse archers as well, which is maybe not something which people associate traditionally with Imladris. When people say horse archers, they generally think of Rohan and Khand, but they are not the only factions which can use them effectively, as this demonstrated. The Misty Mountains were a little bit too passive, I think, in terms of trying to deal with them, because just trying to absorb the casualties was never really going to work unless you fully nuke box and cover every angle, which is going to be frowned upon, especially when you're playing as a faction which is generally as aggressive as the Misty Mountains. Then there are always going to be gaps which players with good micro are going to be able to exploit. So I think maybe a quick assault across the field, trying to finish off the Imladris infantry as quickly as they possibly can. It would have been micro intensive for the Misty Mountains, but I think that probably would have been their best bet, rather than allowing themselves to be slowly bled out at the wrists and their more effective tools being skirmished down. Like the Black Uruks took a lot of arrow fire as well, which were really what they were banking on in melee, alongside the cave trolls to do damage, and they took some substantial losses before they ever got to melee. So yeah, several things here which I think swung the battle in favour of Imladris, and yeah, I think we'll go into this a little bit more when we come to their showcase, which again should be in a couple of days if all is well. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for that.